My name is Kara, and I am 28 years old. Up until a few years back, I was married, living the life most young women could only dream about. My husband Caleb and I had been married for 5 years. I got married relatively early due to a predicament I found myself in. I was an only child to wealthy parents, so you know what to expect. I had the wildest adolescent phase: clubbing, drinking, partying, you name it. I lost my parents to a plane crash when I was 19. I didn't know how to handle the grief, so I turned to my bad habits. After their funeral, our family lawyer informed me that due to my wild tendencies, my parents had included a clause that I had to get married before being granted access to my trust fund. About 2 months after the funeral, I met Caleb. We met at a taxi stand. We exchanged contacts and promised to keep in touch. Along the line, I found out he was a project manager for a new tech startup. He was so nice and stood by me after he found out what happened to me. He would always caution my lifestyle and eventually enrolled me for therapy when I started showing signs of addiction. We got married not long after, and as soon as I had access to my trust fund, he made sure I returned to school. While I was in school, Caleb refused to let me work. He insisted that I focus on school and therapy. As I was rounding off college, he told me that he was more comfortable with me being a stay-at-home wife than me working. I agreed with him since I really didn't see myself as the working type. Since then, he'd take care of bills around the house and send me money for upkeep. The arrangement was lovely at first, but as our expenses grew, he had to work longer. He'd rarely be home in time for dinners, and I would still be asleep at the times he left for work. Even on weekends, he would cut back on hanging out with me, all in the name of work. I spoke to him about it, and he explained that it was because he was working towards a promotion. He promised that everything would change when he got the promotion. Things did change when he got promoted, but for the worse. He became busier and started staying over at work more often, only coming home on weekends. Due to his packed schedule, he would end up sleeping through the weekends. Our sexual life began to wane. To be honest, he took me on dates, shopping and all that, when he had the time, which was once in a blue moon. Amidst all this, I was slipping into loneliness and was regressing back to drinking. I once tried talking to him about it, only to find out he had fallen asleep. I couldn't blame him, for he had to work that hard for me to live lavishly. But at that time, I didn't understand him. Slowly, bad thoughts started creeping in. I started to feel like he didn't love me anymore, that I was too useless for him to pay attention to. Now I think about it, there were many more times I could have told him about what was going on. But I didn't. I just retracted back into my shell. I started talking less. I wouldn't initiate conversations if he didn't. When he made moves to touch me, I would turn him down, chucking it to my mood. I turned to alcohol and eventually drugs as a coping mechanism. I made friends with the regulars at the bar. We soon developed a schedule. We would drink our asses off during the week and rest during the weekends. The arrangement was fine by me, given that Caleb wouldn't be home till the weekends. During one of our outings, I complained to my friends about my situation with my husband regarding our intimacy. One of the other girls in the group suggested that I should try other men if mine wasn't performing up to expectations. She called it outsourcing, not cheating, but I brushed it off, saying I loved Caleb too much to cheat on him. But every time I was alone, my mind kept trailing off to the idea. He seemed to have noticed the shift in my attitude and started asking if everything was all right. I told him everything was fine, but he didn't believe me. So he took the next week off and decided to observe me himself. I didn't realize I was starting to heavily depend on alcohol again until he pointed it out. It seems he had gone to visit my therapist because he came back really worried and started apologizing for not being there for me. He sat me down and sincerely asked what was going on. At first I was acting standoffish, but when I realized that he wasn't going anywhere if I didn't talk, I started coming clean. We were in mid-conversation when he got a call from the office requiring him to go to the office. He, however, promised me to be back early so we could continue our conversation. Later that day, he sent me a message saying he wouldn't be coming back. I was angry that I wasn't his number one priority. I went straight to the bar and met my friends there already drinking. They were stunned to see me as I had canceled my plans with them to talk to Caleb. They seemed to have guessed what had happened because they didn't ask me any questions, just slid me a bottle of tequila. As we were leaving the bar all tipsy, I ran into an old classmate from my wilder days, Ben. He seemed ecstatic about seeing me again. He offered to get me a drink, but I declined, saying I was already tipsy. He gave me his card, and I gave him my number. He promised to keep in touch, which he did. I started seeing Ben. It started with flirty texts to lunch and all. He made me feel seen. A voice in my head was screaming danger, but I drowned it with another bottle of wine. I even recorded some of our encounters just for the thrill. Things started to go haywire one night. We had just come back from dinner. I was barefoot, laughing silly, albeit a bit drunk. Caleb grabbed my laptop from the study table while I headed to the wine cellar for another round of drinks. Caleb was always joking, always curious. But that night, he was both. He asked to go through my folders, and I said he could. Perhaps if I wasn't drunk, I would have thought it through before giving him permission. I came back to the sitting room from the cellar to ask him which wine he preferred when he asked me what was in my saved folders. I replied with just memes and travel destinations. He started going on about how he was planning a vacation for us, but I wasn't paying attention. Not until he asked about what videos we're doing in a memes and photos folder. My heart skipped a bit as he made a bid to transfer the videos to a new folder. I snatched my laptop from him a little too harshly. Then he smiled down at me and said he was now interested in seeing the videos. I whined and thrashed, asking him to ignore the videos until he relented. Later that night, as we got into bed to sleep, he asked if I was hiding something from him. Maybe I should have come clean then. But the devil on my shoulders cheered me on to lie to him. And I did. I reassured him that there was nothing to hide. I turned my back to him and mentally went through everything I did while he was in the shower. I had changed the password to my laptop and changed the file location elsewhere. In my own little world, I thought that was the smartest thing to do. Days went by and I gradually forgot about our little face-off. He came back from work about 2 weeks later and asked to borrow my laptop. He claimed his own had crashed and given his line of work. That was very believable. I unlocked it for him and went on to watch movies. About 2 hours later, he called out for me, jokingly asking where my saved folders were. I told him I thought we had agreed to leave it alone. He laughed and said, "Relax, babe. I just wanted to know your favorite destinations." I thought he had forgotten about it until he said he found it. I rushed to grab the laptop, but he had already clicked one of the videos. "Caleb, don't." I trailed off, but it was too late. He asked if I was cheating, and I couldn't bring myself to respond. The silence following his accusation was not the absence of sound, but a physical entity. Thick and suffocating, it pressed the air from my lungs. Caleb's face, so often alive with easy smiles and gentle concern, had become a mask of stone. He reiterated that I was cheating on him, this time as a verdict, not a question. I was short of words. "It's not what you think," I whispered, the words a pathetic automatic defense that sounded hollow even to my own ears. What else could it possibly be? He didn't yell, he didn't throw the laptop, he just shut my laptop and placed it on the study table as gently as it can get. The tranquility of which he did it was more terrifying than any outburst. "Who is he?" His voice was low, stripped of all emotion. An old classmate. It was only once, Caleb, just once. The lie was instinctive, an immediate and desperate attempt to minimize the fallout. But he'd seen the folder. He'd seen the multiple video files, time-stamped over several weeks. He let out a short, bitter puff of air that was supposed to be a laugh. "Don't." That single word carried the weight of all my betrayal in it. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was pushing through water. He walked past me, not meeting my eyes, and went into our bedroom. I stood rooted to the spot in the living room as the sounds of him opening drawers and the quiet zip of a duffel bag filtered out. It was panic, cold and sharp, finally piercing my alcoholic haze and the numbness of shame. I rushed into the bedroom. "Caleb, please, let me explain. I was lonely. You were never here. I was drowning and you were at the office." I was crying now, the tears hot and messy. He stopped packing, a pile of shirts clutched in his hand. For the first time, he looked at me, the raw pain in his eyes making me flinch. He said calmly that while he was at the office slaving away so I could live in this house, buy the wine I was always drinking, I was cheating on him. He went on about how he was struggling to build a life for us, not knowing that I was destroying it. He shook his head, a world of disappointment in the gesture, and said loneliness wasn't an excuse to cheat on one's partner, not to talk of recording it. He zipped the bag shut and said he needed space and was going to a hotel. And just like that, he was gone. The click of the front door sounded louder than any sound I'd ever heard. This house that had felt so empty when he'd merely been absent turned into a cavern of his absence. It was no longer just empty. It was abandoned. The next few days were a dose of self-inflicted torture. I didn't go to the bar, didn't call my so-called friends. I just sat in the silence, switching between sobbing fits and stares at the wall. I drank, but the alcohol no longer brought numbness, only regret. I replayed every moment of our marriage, from his initial kindness after my parents' death to the gradual drift. I saw all the opportunities I'd missed, the countless times I could have reached out instead of retreated. My victimhood, which I had worn like a cloak, now felt like a flimsy, pathetic costume. He didn't come home for a week. When he finally did, it was to talk. He was calm and collected and utterly remote. He looked like my husband, but the man I knew was gone, replaced by a polite, grieving stranger. He sat me down and told me he had spoken to a lawyer and feels I should do the same too. The word lawyer made reality dawn on me. He was leaving me. I whined and begged that I would go into counseling, stop drinking, and focus more on therapy. But my pleas fell on deaf ears. He chided, saying that I should have considered those options before cheating. He said he had lost trust in me and couldn't look at me without seeing the videos. He said he couldn't sleep on our bed and act like he didn't see those videos. He said he had already filed for divorce and he cited irreconcilable differences as the reason. He told me kindly that he wasn't going to fight me for my trust fund and that he just wanted out. His generosity in the face of my treachery was its own special kind of punishment. He wasn't trying to ruin me. He was just trying to escape the ruin I had created. The divorce proceedings were quiet and meticulous. No screaming matches in court. No bitter fights over assets. Caleb was scrupulously fair, and I was too broken to contest anything. My family lawyer handled my side with professional detachment that felt like judgment. The trust fund was mine, intact. Caleb kept his own savings, his car, and the house. It was all so civil. It felt obscene. As I signed the papers on the day the divorce was finalized, my hand shook. Caleb was already there, having signed first. He nodded once at me, a brief, formal dip of his head, and then walked out of the office, out of my life. I stood on the sidewalk outside, the manila envelope containing my dissolved marriage feeling like a lead weight in my hands. I was 26 years old, divorced, an alcoholic, and utterly alone. My first few months of my new existence passed in a blur. I rented a small apartment and proceeded to fill the emptiness with bottles. The trust fund meant I didn't have to surface for air. I cut off the bar friends. The old classmate had ghosted me the moment he found out Caleb knew, confirming what I had already suspected. He wasn't a rebellion. He was a mistake. I hit my rock bottom on a Tuesday. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, unsure how I'd gotten there. My head throbbed, my mouth tasted bitter, and when I caught my reflection in the black screen of the television, I didn't recognize the haggard, hollow-eyed woman staring back. I saw my parents' faces in my mind, not as they were on the plane, but as they were in life, strong, successful, deeply disappointed in my teenage antics, yet always loving. And I thought of the clause in their will. They hadn't forced me to marry to be cruel. They'd done it because they knew I was lost, that I needed someone to rely on, someone to pull me back as I was drowning in my own stupidity. And I found that person, just that I took him for granted. There in that moment, the final wisps of my denial vanished. I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I was the one who caused my misery. Caleb's absence wasn't the reason for my affair. My own profound brokenness was. The plane crash had shattered my world, but I was the one who had refused to pick up the pieces, expecting everyone else to do that for me. It was the hardest truth I had ever faced, and it was also my liberation. I didn't have some kind of dramatic realization. I simply got up. I showered, the water scalding away weeks of grime. I threw every bottle of alcohol in the apartment into a trash bag and took it to the dumpster. Then I found my phone. My hands were trembling, not from withdrawal, but from fear, and I made 2 calls. The first was to my old therapist. I left a message, my voice cracking, asking if she would see me again. The second was harder. I dialed Caleb's number. It went straight to voicemail. He likely changed his number, but I needed to say the words, even if it was to a digital void. "Caleb," I said, my voice a ragged whisper. "It's Kara. I know you'll probably never hear this, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I need to say it. I am so sorry for everything. Not just the cheating, for not being your partner, for not seeing you, for using my grief as a weapon. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it. I am so, so sorry. I hope you find happiness. Goodbye." I soon learned that the path to redemption isn't a sprint, but rather a slow, grueling climb out of a deep and dark well. Therapy was brutal. We dismantled my grief, entitlement, and addiction. I came to realize that my loneliness had been a choice I'd made through declining to be vulnerable with the one person who'd vowed to stand by me. I began attending support meetings, finding peace in the shared stories of other people fighting their own demons. I got a job. It was a simple, entry-level position at a local art gallery, a world away from the lavish life I'd led. The pay was meager, but the satisfaction of earning my own money, of having a purpose that didn't involve spending Caleb's or my trust fund, was intoxicating in a way that alcohol never was. I began to take classes, not for a degree, but for me, a literature course, a pottery workshop. I was learning how to be alone with myself without being lonely. I was learning who Kara was, separate from being a daughter, wife, or victim. It was a year after the divorce, and by that point, I was in a much better place. I was sober, I was stable, and for the first time in my life, genuinely self-reliant. The trust fund was still there, but I treated it as my parents wanted me to, a safety net, not a hammock. I took a small portion of it and went back to school, this time for social work. I wanted to help people who were as lost as I had been. A few days ago, I met Caleb again. It appears that I left some of the important documents needed for travel at the house. I took all my willpower to knock on the door, and the door opened to an unfamiliar woman. I introduced myself to her, and she let me know that Caleb is not around. I made sure to explain why I was there to prevent any misunderstanding, but she was adamant on not letting me in. She said that Caleb had moved the things I left behind to the garage, and that she could go and get them. She soon came back with a box, and I sincerely thanked her. As I was leaving the neighborhood, I ran into Caleb. We exchanged pleasantries, and I asked him if we could talk at the nearby park. I spoke up first, telling him that he looked well. He responded that I did too. I apologized for cheating on him and taking his affection for granted. He went on to say he got my voicemail, but he didn't know what to say, hence his silence. I let him know that I sent the voicemail out of sincerity and not spite. He told me he switched jobs, took on one with less hours, and was learning to play the guitar. He said he was living a good life, and that I should live a good life too. Hearing that he had a good life, a life without me, should have hurt. Instead, it felt like an absolution. I had caused him immense pain, but he'd healed. He had moved on. We talked for a few more minutes, a stilted but civil conversation about the affair. After giving me a few words of advice, he left me to think about the affair in a new light. I wanted to call him back, but I couldn't. There was no future for us on that park bench, and that was okay. The story of Kara and Caleb was over, and its ending had been tragic, but I refused to let my story end there. The redemption I had sought wasn't about winning him back. It was about becoming a person who would never again make the choices that lost him. It was about facing the wreckage of my past, not with a bottle in my hand, but with clear eyes and a steady heart, and building something new, something true from the broken pieces. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed I could.